There's a feature on some fighter jets that lets them pull off mid-air maneuvers so extreme it looks like they're hanging in the sky, completely frozen. And depending on which country builds the aircraft, this single technology can tell you exactly how they expect the next air war to unfold. My name is Richard and welcome to Ron's Industries. Today in the tech industry, we're talking about one of the most fascinating and misunderstood pieces of aviation tech, thrust vectoring. Most people first noticed thrust vectoring when the F-22 Raptor publicly debuted with its insane aerial displays, flips, its insane nose authority, and turns like the falling leaf that looked physically impossible. But here's the funny thing, the F-35 Lightning II doesn't have it. Alright, okay. I know that the F-35B technically can redirect its engine nozzle, but against that same logic, I'm going to disregard it and also the Harrier on the same grounds. Now, since the details around the F-47 are all speculation, I'm going to leave that one out as an unknown as well. Russia, on the other hand, puts thrust vectoring on half of their fighter planes, such as the Su-35S, the Su-30MK, and the series of Flanker H variants, as well as the Su-57 Felon. What about the Chinese? The J-20A and the J-20B are apparently being equipped with thrust vectoring in line with their newly developing engines such as the WS-15, which coincidentally started development in the 90s and got installed onto the J-20s in March 2022, which would be an enhancement on the initial J-20, but we'll see how that goes. The J-35 could see thrust vectoring depending on which engine actually gets fitted, although the ones that we can see right now have got their symmetrical exhausts. But planes such as the J-36 and the J-50, again, are open to speculation. Since they're tailless designs, it would make sense to add additional maneuverability to them, but since tailless designs are much less stable, would it even benefit? So the question is, why do some nations seem to apparently swear by it while others are showing the first signs of maybe ignoring it? To understand that, we need to go back to basics. Now, every aircraft since the Wright brothers has used control surfaces in some way, shape, or form. Surfaces such as ailerons, elevators, rudders. But that's just the beginning. Modern aircraft and fighters also use other surfaces like flaps or canards or slats, spoilers. The list goes on. Each of these surfaces plays a specific role, and not every aircraft uses every surface. These control surfaces create specific changes in the aerodynamic forces that let the pilot move the aircraft exactly as they want, even at supersonic speeds. Here's the catch. All of these surfaces only work when air's actually flowing over them. If an aircraft slows down too much, climbs too high, or hits an angle of attack where air no longer moves properly across those surfaces, such as in a stall, control begins to fade. And that's where thrust vectoring really steps in. Now, think of thrust vectoring like a boat's outboard motor. If you point that engine in a different direction, the whole boat will respond. Now, instead of relying on airflow, thrust vectoring uses the jet exhaust itself to steer the aircraft. Now, at low speeds where normal control surfaces are at their weakest, the engine exhaust still has massive amounts of power and incredible velocity. This gives the aircraft a second, independent source of control. The benefits show up in three key areas. First one is low-speed flight. That's where they get massive nose authority for high angle of attack maneuverability. High-altitude flight, where thin air weakens regular control surfaces. And as a third point, there's also the issue of redundancy, a potential backup to control the aircraft if an aerodynamic surface or the mechanics behind it happen to fail. So it's basically a free upgrade to maneuverability. Well, not exactly. Now, here's the part that maybe some people don't expect. When aircraft are moving fast enough, thrust vectoring sort of becomes almost irrelevant. At high speed, traditional control surfaces generate more than enough force to push the aircraft to its limits, typically well beyond its peak performance, and often beyond the physical tolerance and capabilities of the pilot. This is where the pilots could experience things called G-lock, or G-force-induced loss of consciousness. In a word, the aircraft can turn harder than the human pilot can even stand. Now, at these speeds where traditional services can both black out the pilot and require computer intervention just to maintain control of the aircraft, thrust vectoring probably doesn't necessarily offer any extra benefit. And here's why I say it. The French Rafale, according to open information, is allegedly capable of 11G maneuvers in emergencies. Naval airframes such as the F-14 and F-18 are 7.5G airframes, and pilots are pretty much at the limit of survival at 9. In air combat, air-to-air missiles are reportedly having agilities of up to or beyond 60G, and that can already outperform both the pilots and even the super maneuverability of the current airframes themselves. So what about at high altitude? Well, aircraft like the SR-71 and the U-2 spy planes operated comfortably above 80,000 feet, and that was without thrust vectoring. Fighter jets typically top out around about 60,000 feet. Now, I suspect that's probably more to do with life support than maneuverability. So thrust vectoring isn't there to defeat missiles or to add performance. Deductively, main advantage is at low speed and high angle of attack maneuvering. Unfortunately, that's also where aircraft are at their most vulnerable. Now, yes, thrust vectoring lets a fighter pull its nose onto a target faster than any other control surface. But at low speed and high angles of attack, you'd basically be a sitting duck for short-range missiles. You'd be easy to hit with ground-based air defense, not to mention that the aircraft would just simply bleed its energy and have its next maneuvers become entirely predictable. In modern air combat, speed, or energy, that's life. Stopping midair for a dramatic maneuver might look great at an air show, but in a real fight, it would be the worst thing a pilot could do. So if low-speed maneuvering is dangerous, then why do some countries invest so heavily in thrust vectoring, or have such a high adoption, while others could be showing the first signs of leaving it out? I think that answer tells us how different nations expect the future of air combat to actually be unfolding. So let's start with the West. The US and allied nations currently seem to be focusing on things such as stealth, electronic warfare, long-range missiles, and have a focus on beyond visual range, or BVR combat. Missiles like the AIM-120D AMRAAM, the AIM-260 Joint Advanced Tactical Missile, and the upcoming Mako series are all about hitting enemies long before they ever see you. The logic is simple. If you can neutralize the enemy while they're over 100 kilometers away, then thrust vectoring really doesn't seem to matter all that much. Now contrast that with Russia and China. Aircraft like the Su-35, the Su-57, and the J-20 have large or larger radar signatures, less mature stealth, and a heavier reliance on close-range maneuverability. So this leads to a different strategy. Overwhelm the enemy with larger numbers, close the distance, force close-range combat, and then use thrust vectoring to win the dogfight. So we've got two philosophies and two very different expectations for how future wars will be fought in the air. So will Western jets continue to adopt thrust vectoring into the future? The F-22 does have it. Now the F-35 Lightning doesn't. The YF-23, which competed with the F-22, didn't. And the upcoming F-47 and the F/A-XX, if they happen, well, we don't know yet. The US Navy hasn't used thrust vectoring on its carrier aircraft either. But there is one interesting case, and that's the heavily modified X-62 Vista, or Variable Stability In-Flight Simulator Test Aircraft, which is built on the F-16, and it uses advanced flight controls that mimic thrust vectoring without actually having it, proving that the West may not need moving nozzles to get the same control effect. If the future US fighters skip thrust vectoring altogether, well, to me that signals confidence that long-range beyond visual range combat will dominate. And if they had it, it means that they expect the future fights to happen up close and personal. So what does thrust vectoring really tell us? Well, It's not a cheat code. It doesn't make a jet invincible, and at high speed it doesn't really add much at all. But it does give aircraft an expanded control envelope, especially at low speed and extreme aircraft attitudes. But more importantly, it tells us what each nation expects the next generation of air combat to look like. A beyond visual range focused future where stealth and long range missiles decide the fight, or a close range knife fight where agility and nose authority win the day. Either way, thrust vectoring will continue, most likely to appear on future aircraft, missiles, and rockets. Any platform that needs control from the moment that it leaves the ground or straight off the launch rail. So if you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what aviation topic you want covered next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.